Please go ahead, sir. We are live now.
Good morning to all the participants and uh, good morning to all the panelists. Our chief guest today, Mr. Sudhakar Shukla, the whole-time member of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. We have a battery of learned speakers today, and starting with Mr. Alok Deer, who is the co-chairman of National Council for IBC and Valuation for ASSOCHAM. He would be giving with his opening remarks and welcome address. Then we have a knowledge partner, which is CRISIL, and Nitesh Jain is representing CRISIL. They have done some research on this pre-packaged insolvency resolution process, which is the subject today. In short, we may call it PIRP or PIRP, whatever is comfortable. The pre-packaged insolvency, like when this, I will introduce the panelists after the address of Mr. Alok Deer and after the sharing of knowledge by Mr. Nitesh Jain. Then I will introduce all the panelists in detail. So before, without wasting much of the time, I would ask Mr. Alok Deer to start with his opening remarks and welcome address.
Thanks, Anil. Thank you and congratulations to ASSOCHAM for organizing this series of 4 e-summits on insolvency and bankruptcy code. And thank you for having me in this summit. I am indeed privileged to be part of this panel. We have chief guest, Mr. Sudhakar Shukla, a whole-time member of the IBBI, Mr. Anil Goel, the session moderator, Nitesh, Pooja, Jyoti, Mukesh, Ankur, Sahil, and Anju. All of them are renowned professionals with tremendous domain expertise, and I look forward to a very intellectually stimulating session. A big welcome to all of you and also to the delegates who have taken time out to join this session. I am sure it would be very useful to you with a galaxy of experts explaining to you the nitty-gritty of this very significant piece of legislation, which impacts all of us in our commercial lives. In one way or the other, we are all stakeholders and partners in this process. Friends, as you are aware, IB 16 has been operational for nearly 5 years now. It represented a tectonic shift in our policy on corporate insolvency, resolution, and liquidation. However, we have barely lost 1.5 years due to the pandemic, and the entire ecosystem has been somewhat put on a pause button during this time, which in my mind has to a certain extent resulted in drift in the system, prolonged timelines, additional cost and burden on CDs, brought of RAs, and reduced values to stakeholders. But at the same time, it has been a time of reflection, a time for us all to analyze what has been conceived and shortcomings in the system, if any, and how to mitigate them. This period has been especially harsh on the MSME sector, which incidentally constitutes 70% of the companies in India. The challenges which are being faced are one, delays and non-adherence to timelines. We are aware that a very large percentage of companies have far exceeded the original timelines of 180 days, 270 days, 330 days, and some of them have been going on for years and years. Another issue which I may point out, a bit sensitive, but judicial intervention has also been a cause of many of these difficulties. Innovative solutions, sometimes outside the scope of the legislation, have also come forward. Litigation, evolution of law, often in unexpected ways, conflict, and that I would say for some of the lawyer friends who are here, we have seen how it has been evolving. We have been arguing on one line and then suddenly we find a Supreme Court judgment which is completely different. And we all run and go into a different direction altogether. I mean, case in the point is with respect to limitation. Conflicting legal precedents, which have added to the confusion. Amendments, and there have been many amendments, which have tried to evolve policy like 29A and clarifying issues like limitation and meeting with emerging challenges to push the enactment in the right direction. Mounting costs of CIRP. This is something which is extremely crucial because in many cases, we have seen that the cost of conducting CIRP, both in terms of the actual money spent with respect to the fees relating to RPs and other service providers, and also the losses which are being incurred in the resolution process. Exposing limitations of RPs in running the CDs. Now, to our friends, please do not think that I am trying to cast an aspersion on the RPs who are doing, to my mind, the best effort that they can. But the sheer challenge of running companies, and particularly companies in distress, is difficult for experts in the same line of business. And RPs sometimes come with a somewhat cleaner slate, and it is difficult for them to simply, as they say, hit the ground running insofar as operation of the companies is concerned. And to a certain extent, they start relying upon the existing promoters, and therefore it does expose a bit of a limitation insofar as running the business is concerned. Another cause has been the drought of the resolution applicants. Except for some very iconic cases, we are seeing that many CIRPs and even in liquidation processes, we are not having resolution applicants or acquirers to take over businesses, and that also results in delays and reducing value for stakeholders. And one of the last issues which has really troubled everybody is the lack of the cooperation of the corporate debtors and the promoters, which also derails many resolution processes, the CIRP or even in the liquidation process. MSMEs, in addition to everything that I've said, have their own challenges. Management of MSME is promoter driven and is dependent upon their involvement in running the business. RPs are not able to cope up with running these entities as smaller businesses lack sophisticated processes and professional management. There is a void as soon as the management shifts to the RP. Service providers and suppliers have direct relationships with the management, and it is sometimes on the strength of the management that even services or supplies are provided. That immediately evaporates as soon as an RP comes into play. That's one of the major issues with running MSMEs by the RPs. The lack of RAs is also a more serious issue insofar as MSMEs are concerned. There are hardly any people who would be interested or attracted to take over these small businesses in distress. An opinion has been emerging that CIRP may not be the medicine or panacea suitable for all companies. It is not a one size that fits all. On the positive side, IBC has certainly brought about a maturity in the relationships between the debtors and the creditors. Debtors have understood that they have to set their ship in order. There is no advantage in procrastinating. If they want to save their businesses, time is now to take decisive action. Creditors have also learned their lessons. They have also learned that they have to take quick decisions to protect value and resolve the cases. Leaving the matters for litigation, as has been in the past in DRTs or BIFR or other such forums, has not worked to the advantage of the creditors. And they have started realizing that they are also requiring to take decisions. So urgency is in the air. That, I think, is the greatest achievement of IBC till now. In this background, the government has been mulling on some alternate mechanism which is required for MSME sector and can later be utilized for larger businesses. It was noticed that in UK and other Western countries, pre-pack or consensus-based solutions and resolutions have been very effective. And this was thought of as having immense potential in India, particularly looking to the issue that more than 70% of the companies in India are actually in MSMEs. Out of this cauldron of thought process emerged the ordinance on 5th of April 21 to bring the pre-pack insolvency. Incidentally, or immediately thereafter, on 9th April 21, the pre-pack insolvency resolution process regulations were put in place. So in a matter of within a week, we had a whole system in place, effective and ready to go. And as we speak today, the amendment bill to replace the ordinance has been approved by the Lok Sabha on 28 July and the Rajya Sabha on 3rd August. So very soon, this ordinance, which in some sense one would, from a purely constitutional point, somebody would call temporary in nature, becomes a permanent part of the IBC. The pre-pack mechanism is considered as providing quicker, cost-effective mechanism, blending the elements and virtues of formal and informal insolvency and providing value maximizations to stakeholders while being least disruptive to the continuity of the businesses. This combines efficiency, speed, cost effectiveness, flexibility, while importing binding effect to the resolution plans, providing adequate checks and balances to ensure smooth operations of PIRP and not providing any leeway to the corporate debtors or its promoters to take advantage of the process. Under PIRP, a resolution plan is informally negotiated between the debtors and creditors before the formal process is put in motion. Once the formal process to approve the plan is commenced, thereafter, there is a time-bound arrangement for completing the process. I'm not going to go into great details of the PIRP process because we have a whole panel of experts who are dealing with it. But I'll take this opportunity to at least put the scaffolding, the skeletal structure of the PIRP for the benefit of the delegates. The panelists, of course, being expert, may think of it as just being a primer. Be that as it may. The salient features of the PIRP are, one, that the PIRP can be initiated only by the CD and not by the creditors. This is very meaningful because it is therefore a voluntary process, and we have seen a lot of time having been wasted in admissions of cases under CIRP, where the promoters and the CDs are themselves fighting that the company should not be taken in CIRP, whether under section 7 or 9. The second is the threshold of the default has been fixed at 10 lakh. Therefore, looking to the size of the MSMEs, a lower threshold is provided. The process can be initiated with consent of 66% of the unrelated FCs and a special majority of 75% of the shareholders. Therefore, if the process is put in place, which is done by the CD, with the consent of 66% of the creditors and with 75% of the shareholders, therefore, the entire process of litigation, or a significant part of the litigation process, which we have been seeing in the CIRP, is done away. Moreover, there is more or less an approved resolution plan in hand, even before the process commences, which can be quickly approved without time being taken in negotiations during the formal process, because even during the informal process, the negotiations have already taken place. Thereafter, the entire process involves the corporate debtor to file an application, and the application can be filed by the corporate debtor only when he has already put in place the base resolution plan, which has the consent of the creditors. He has put a declaration in place saying that he will file within 90 days. It is not for the purpose of creating any in the process. Then he will also be providing the information memorandum, preliminary information memorandum. He will also be providing the list of creditors and the list of claimants. The purpose of all this is that the information memorandum is there in place right in the beginning of the process for the purpose that in case the base resolution plan is not approved, there is every information available already in the hands of prospective resolution applicants or competing resolution applicants, and no delay or time is wasted in getting together. All the claims are already in place, every information is in place. So once this arrangement is there, an application is filed, there is a very determined timeline of 14 days within which this application has to be determined. So that timeline may become far more effective insofar as the PIRP is concerned as against the process under the CIR. Once the admission takes place, and once the application is filed, the adjudicating authorities can admit or reject. But once the admission takes place, the adjudicating authority will initiate the moratorium. Secondly, they will appoint the RP. Incidentally, the RP who is to be appointed, can you just give me a second? Somebody please take him away. Please shut the door, take him away. Sorry, my dog walks in and I'm sure you can hear his whelps. So once the, I'm sorry, actually coming back to it, the resolution professional who is to be appointed has to be appointed with the consent of the COC. So when the COC is giving a consent for the purpose of initiating the insolvency process, inherently, they are also evaluating the RP who will be appointed for the purpose, and it is with their consent. So in a sense, there is a check and balance insofar as the COC is concerned to ensure that the RP who is getting appointed is somebody who is looking with neutrality to the interest not only of the corporate debtor but also the other stakeholders, particularly the financial creditors. So after this process is put in place, within a period of 90 days, the base resolution plan which has been put in by the corporate debtor is examined by the COC. They may negotiate it further if they like, and they may thereafter approve the resolution plan. However, there is a caveat. If there is any haircut to an operational creditor or the plan is not approved, then the RP will invite the resolution plan from competing bidders. And once the competing bidders come into play, and of course, to my mind, that is the only one thing I have to point out. The timeline for the competing bidder to come in and put a resolution plan is a little short. So while a PIRP is going on, obviously nobody would be investing time, money, and effort as a resolution applicant or a competing bidder to examine that case. And once the invitation to a competing bidder comes in, the timeline of 15 days is rather short for somebody to come up with a resolution plan, which is in fact a significantly better resolution plan than the base resolution plan that has been put in place. So that, to my mind, is something that we'll have to look at, so that it is not only in the words and the language of the legislation, but in effect, a mechanism for a competing bid is put in place, which is effective and can result in a better resolution plan or significantly better resolution plan emerging. So at that point of time, once the COC has either the base resolution plan to approve or a significantly better plan to approve, once they have approved the resolution plan, the process can be completed. However, in this process, what is most important is various checks and balances have been put in place to misuse the process. Otherwise, it looks very simple. A corporate debtor negotiates with his financial creditors, puts a plan in place, approved by 66% of them. As they say, done and dusted. That's the end of the process. But because the process is simple, and because there is possibility of the corporate debtor trying to misuse it, certain checks and balances are put in place. I'm just going to refer to some of them. 54J, if COC is of the opinion that the affairs of the corporate debtor are being conducted in a fraudulent manner, or there is gross mismanagement in the affairs of the CD, they can, with a 66% vote, in favor of vesting the management with the RP, i.e. shift shift to a creditor in management process rather than a PIRP, which is a debtor in possession structure. Another safeguard under 59N is that in any case during the PIRP process, at any time, the COC with 66% vote can decide to terminate the CIRP. Third safeguard is under 54. If during the PIRP, if 66% of COC vote, they can decide to initiate a CIRP and shift from a PIRP directly into a CIRP. In case of a 54J situation, which is fraudulent conduct of affairs of the business in a fraudulent manner, the adjudicating authority can directly order liquidation. Then in case they order liquidation, they will also put a process for continuation of the avoidance proceedings initiated against the CD promoters and the management. So the fraudsters, so to speak, can't get away. And in case no resolution plan is approved, the RP can file an application to terminate the PIR. Therefore, friends, we have a very balanced piece of legislation which provides a platform to honest business entities to restructure quickly, efficiently, and in a cost-effective manner. With adequate checks and balances, it's a boon to the MSME sector. And now it is open to the market forces to determine the success and future of this significant piece of legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alokji. Thanks a lot. I think within this few minutes, you have covered the brief of the entire structure. As you very validly said, that skeleton, it actually has been very, very meaningful that you've actually gone through the entire structure. The way you have explained why it was needed, the CIRP cost was higher, or even the RAs were not available for MSME. Most of the MSME businesses are kind of mom-pop businesses. They are well run by the promoters, and it's not possible to run by the RP in certain cases. So all these were the reasons why this PPIRP was introduced, and the government very well thought about it. See, there are 2-3 more things that I would like to add, because see, in MSME, we have not been seeing much of M&A transactions, merger and acquisition transactions, and also the reason was the clean slate. You see, there was no scenario in this country that in case I want to join an existing business model, which is MSME, and if I join that existing business, I am not sure about the compliances, statutory obligations, past liabilities. Clean slate was not available to me. But now with this structure available, if I have to just join a company with some investment or as a partner, or then I think this structure can be used. So in case the assets are lesser than the liabilities. So that's the very big opening that we have seen now for MSME. Wherever the assets are lesser than the liabilities, this framework, PPIRP framework, can be used for M&A transactions, for participating as partner, for participating as an investor. So that's a major use of PPIRP framework.
Anil,
thank you very much. Yes.
I only want to add here, in any structure, particularly in an M&A or transactional structure, if writing off of the dues of the statutory liabilities is the focus, then I'm afraid it will not be in the interest of the, if I may say, even the process. It would be a fraudulent process according. Secured creditors, statutory liabilities under law have their own primacy under their state legislations, etc. It is, and if a company goes into liquidation, they will in any case determine their primacies according to their statutory laws. So if the purpose of a PIRP or a CIRP is to get the statutory liabilities written off, and they are often very significant, and in some states, as you may be aware, they are also having a lien and a charge on the assets of the company. one has to be very, very careful and see that the purpose of the PIRP is actually a financial restructuring rather than the writing off of the liabilities of statutory or the government dues. And we have to look at it, as I said, very, very carefully, because that borders sometimes on the question of trying to benefit or give preference to one set of creditors as against others.
Very well, very well. This is the only thing is that the assets must be lesser than the liabilities, and also Section 53 is applicable to PPIRP. These two assumptions are very, very important. And what we understand is Section 53 is available to PPIRP's framework also.
Yeah.
And if the assets are lesser than the liabilities, then probably there is no other solution rather than going for Section 53 waterfall arrangement. So thank you very much. I think it is the time that we should reach out to Mr. Nitesh Jain from CRISIL Rating Limited. Mr. Nitesh Jain is a director of CRISIL Rating Limited, and they are knowledge partners for this series of ASSOCHAM National E-Summit on Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. So Nitesh ji, you can present your research on this pre-packaged insolvency resolution process.
Sure,
Mr.
sure,
Nitesh Jain.
sir. Mr. Goyal, is my screen visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, okay. So, thank you, Mr. Dean. Thank you, Mr. Goyal. Good morning to all of you, Mr. Shukla, Mr. Goyal, Mr. Dheer, other speakers, as well as the delegates. So, initially, I thought I'll do a quick recap of what we had discussed in the last event. But Mr. Dheer has already discussed most of these aspects. So I will quickly run you through that what I have in my presentation. So I thought that I'll talk about how the overall ecosystem has built for IBC as well as the associate infrastructure. But we did discuss these aspects in detail in the last event, so I'll not spend much time here. Similarly, I thought I'll also talk about the the number of cases had been admitted as well as the backlog is rising. Then the twin objective of IBC, which is the recovery as well as the time. So if we look at the recovery from different lenses, one can conclude from a different point of view. Similarly, if I look at from a timeline perspective, IBC has changed the landscape from a timeline perspective, but when we see their own timeline, it is still falling short of. So to conclude on this part, if we look at the 348 cases, and if I put it in two-dimension, chart here, the scattered chart, and if you look at this box here, which represent the ideal quadrant or the desirable quadrant, as I have named it. So we see that most of these 348 cases are outside of desirable quadrant. But at the same time, we see that overall IBC has been a significant change if you look at from the credit culture point of view. And not just that, in fact, the code itself is effective. At the same time, the amendment have been very timely, which we have put it here. And the important one, which you are, or the recent one, which you are discussing here, is the MSME. So I'll bring the presentation focus on the theme of today's discussion, which is PRIP. And Mr. Dheer has also covered this aspect in detail. So I'll try not to repeat what has already been discussed. Before we get into the IBC related aspect from the MS, how the expansion of the definition has happened for MSME last year. So if we look at net, the definition of MSME cover institutions which has a sales of up to 250 crore or the investment of 50 crore. So that's how we look at it. 70% of the enterprise in India are now covered in this MSME category. In fact, recently the trading, the wholesale as well as the retail trading has also been added from a definition point of view. So that's a big change if you look at the ambit of MSME as such. On the right hand side, I have put how many MSMEs we have in India. So there are 6.34 crore. It's an estimate that these are the the number of MSMEs we have here. So essentially, the MSMEs have a significant role in terms of the GDP contribution. If you look at almost 30% of the GDP come from MSME. Similarly, if we look at from the employee generation, there also MSMEs have a significant role to play. But if we look at the registered MSMEs, it's just 35 lakh out of 6.34 crore, which I will cover in the subsequent slide because that's one of the eligibility from PIRP. So this is a quick snapshot of the banking sector from the advances point of view. And if you see that the NPA, so to total 12 or 13 lakh crore out of 97 lakh crore of banking advances have been extended to MSME segment. So just to put it in the context, and if we look at the overall NPA trend, which I had covered in the last presentation as well, we see somewhere mostly 8 to 9% of the banking sector NPAs, which we are estimating. But the difference is in the past, we have seen these NPAs were largely from the large corporates, but we see that now the majority of the newer NPAs are coming from MSMEs or the retail segment. And this is despite many of the government support in terms of the moratorium, restructuring, all these things, but still MSMEs are inherently vulnerable from a cash flow, from a support point of view. And therefore, I see that the PIRP is a shot in arm from an MSME point of view. And Mr. Dheer has already covered many of these things, that this is a hybrid model from debtor in position plus creditor in position. The threshold is also a change from an MSME point of view. Again, there's a Swiss challenge method to get the better resolution plan. From a timeline perspective, it is far better than even CIRP, which itself is far better than all other the mechanism. And this is an alternate mechanism available to MSME. It is not mandatory as such. The section 29A, which is from an eligibility point of view, is applicable for MSMEs as well. Again, here Mr. Dheer has in detail covered the aspects which are from the PIRP process point of view. I will not spend much time here. I simply put it that if you look at it on the left hand side this box, we see that the pre-initiation stage is crucial for the success of PIRP. In terms of the role of CD, even from an IP perspective, it's that way. Many of these things are done at a pre-initiation stage, which saves the bandwidth not just for the corporate data or the IPs, but even the overall legislation, because NCLTs we have all seen and discussed the overburden stage. So this will be a clearly big change if it is implemented successfully. Mr. Dheer had also talked about the global perspective, and I will just briefly talk about, while we see in India, the pre-packs are relatively new, but if you look at US, where the pre-packs were first introduced, there are three forms of pre-pack, which is pre-planned sales, pre-packaged bankruptcy, pre-arranged bankruptcy, and it's significantly different in terms of the timeline. If I talk about the first and second category, the timeline taken is just 2 to 4 months, vis-a-vis traditional Chapter 11, where it takes almost 11 months. If I talk about UK, this is even faster. So a pre-pack sale in the UK facilities the sale of all or part of a company's business or the assets is negotiated with the purchasers prior to the appointment of an administrator, and the administrator effect the sale immediately on, shortly or thereafter. So essentially in UK, it could be a matter of hours in terms of implementing pre-pack, and such sales actually represent almost 29% of all administrations in the UK. It's relatively new, like India, like it has been 2020, it has come into picture from a similar from MSME point of view. If I look at again Canada, it's pretty much in vogue in advanced countries. So I think India will certainly learn from the customization which we have done from Indian point of view, as well as the global context. So to summarize, the benefits of PIRP. It's a hybrid process. It's relatively simpler from a cost-effective point of view and give flexibility. And not just the the corporate debtor, it also helps in retaining the job. And just to make a point again from the global experience, in fact, a majority of the prepacks in the UK have been successful in preserving almost 100% of the jobs. So it gives comfort to the stakeholder beyond just the corporate debtor. So to sum up the presentation, we see that it is clearly a shot in arm for MSME in general, the entrepreneurship. Some of the challenges we see the registration part, which I talked about, the number 35 out of 6 crore plus. That's one aspect. Second is it's available or only the companies or the limited liability partnership LLPs. So law is as such silent on what will happen to proprietorship, partnership, HUF, etc. That's one aspect. The other aspect. Third is the limited marketability of MSME at present, which Mr. Dheer also touched upon, that the secondary market is not available or not so effective. And therefore, we see that the way forward for PIRP to be successful is that it should be quickly tested, and we should understand the teething issues. And with that experience, possibly it can be expanded to beyond MSMEs as well to harness the overall benefit of the IBC. And the third and the important point is again coming from the development of the secondary market. If we talk about, let's say, the best alternate plan, etc., those can be more effective only when we have the vibrant secondary market for this stress. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I'll hand it over back to Mr. Goyal.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nitesh. This presentation is wonderfully prepared presentation. I have picked up few points out of this presentation, like one, that like India has 35 lakh MSME registered as on March 2021, and this is a significant information. And also that the most important part that Nitesh, that you touched, was that the role of the financial creditor in a pre-initiation period. So in fact, that is the most important part of the PPIRP. So in case this pre-initiation process is completed, then thereafter it becomes very simple, because this is actually almost a litigation-free process. Because in case the financial creditors agree, the corporate debtor initiates it, then there would not be any opposition to the application. So very rightly, the application can definitely be admitted within 14 days, as provided in the law also, because there will not be any opposition. So that's a very, very significant, and we will discuss with our panelists today. These are very important questions that all the participants would like to know. So our panelists today would be, we'll start with Ms. Pooja Mahajan, and she is the managing partner of Chandyok and Mahajan. She is an advocate, a prominent advocate, and she regularly appears before NCLT and CLAT and other courts. Ms. Jyoti Singh is the founder of AJA Legal and Associates. She is also practicing insolvency law as an advocate, and it's a full law firm. Bhugesh Amin is an insolvency professional, an experienced chartered accountant. He's a partner with BDO. The experience that he would add to this discussion would be with regard to the duties of the resolution professional in this case. That, of course, would be very, very significant for all the participants today. Mr. Ankur Srivastava is the managing partner of EZY Law, again a law firm, having exposure with the NCLT, NCLAT, and the entire insolvency and bankruptcy law, maybe at different courts. Ms. Anju Agarwal, a very prominent face, a gorgeous face, an insolvency professional, chartered accountant. She's part of ASC Group as a partner. She actually is handled CIRP, and I think she is also handling some of the PIRP cases at a pre-initiation stages, because I don't think there is any application has been filed so far, because this 90 days pre-initiation period is not yet finished, and the financial creditors are taking their time in concluding the first part of the PPIRP. So after the panel discussions, we have our chief guest today, Mr. Sudhakar Shukla. He would also provide his views about the PPIRP. So maybe that again, I may start from Ms. Jyoti. So as Ms. Jyoti, the Alok Dheer has given us a kind of structure in a brief manner. That's completely understandable. So what do you think that the optimum scenario where this PPIRP framework can be used by the MSME sector, where you feel that it can be used? Now, since we know that why it was introduced, what was the difficulties faced in CIRP, we were not getting the RAs, we were not getting the control on the business. Even if we get the control, the RP was not able to understand. The suppliers or the service providers are not with the RP, they were always with the promoters. So all this that we have seen, so where exactly you feel that this PPIRP framework can be used by MSME? What is that optimum situation, Ms. Jyoti?
Thank you so much, Mr. Goyal. Thank you, SOCHAM, for having me. Thanks to all the panelists and delegates. So, sir, I think to start with, I think one is that, of course, this PRIP has right now been used for MSME sector for a simple reason that it is a very unique sector where there is always a credit crunch, and in the market, it's very unique in its own capacity, and that is the reason it was very important, as was presented by Nilesh also, that it almost contributes to 30% of GDP and a large amount in terms of having giving jobs to various people. So one is, of course, it was very important that when the entire world was hit by COVID, MSME sector is taken care of, okay? And that is the reason this was introduced. Threshold was reduced to 10 lakh rupees so that maximum benefit can be availed by MSME sector. Ultimately, the optimal utilization will be when the MSME sector is using it in the initial stage of default, because only then it will lead to, less in that sense, depletion of assets. It will lead to quicker resolution. It will also lead to having more and more faith in this entire, pre-pack scenario, which is pre-pack resolution framework, which is a hybrid model. But I always feel that this is only a stepping stone, because ultimately, after seeing the success here in MSME, I think it should be spread to general, the corporates also, because ultimately, look at a scenario where a hybrid model is used for group insolvency. So probably it is a stepping stone where, in case this functions for MSME, where this, informal negotiation process is accepted by the lender community as a whole, by all the stakeholders as a whole, then ultimately it has to be, sort of used to the general corporate, in general scenario, and it will work wonders when there are scenarios of group insolvency, which we want to introduce in future.
So I think, Ms. Jyoti, like why the creditors, means the lenders, would allow the corporate debtor, MSME corporate debtor, to initiate PPIRP? What would be their thinking? Do you think that they would allow? Because see, their permission, their consent is required for initiating PPIRP. So why they would? What are the things that the corporate debtor can argue before the lenders that you should approve the initiation of PPIRP?
Absolutely. So first, I think is the quicker. It is a quicker mechanism. Second, yes, the debtor in possession. So there is no issue of tomorrow promoter not cooperating, not sharing any information with anybody. So it will instill more faith in the promoter also, that it can have the company there. And secondly, it is not at all detrimental to the creditors, because there will be a base plan presented to them. Okay, look at a scenario when before the initiation of CIRP, they had to do other OTS schemes, which never resulted into any statutory framework. Here, it's a hybrid process. So they also know, one, that it is transparent. So transparency in that sense between the lender and the debtor will not be a problem. Secondly, it's a hybrid model, but yet it is statutorily monetized, right? Because IBBI RP needs to submit reports and all of that. So there is a professional who is already put in the place, and they are not entirely dependent on the debtor also. But the RP also plays an integral role in the beginning itself. So because of the nature that it will be timely, it will be less, costly, and the intervention of the courts in that sense will be lesser. I think the lenders, and it can lead to value maximization also, because sometimes the time taken in resolving any insolvency also leads to asset depletion. So I think with this, and it is not detrimental, because ultimately, if this is not successful in any manner, then there are 7, remedies already available to them. So because of which, I think they will use this more and more.
Very well, very well. So the lenders would accept this part because it is cost effective, it is quicker. Even the CIRP cost is not supposed to be contributed by them. The CIRP cost would be borne by the corporate debtor, and that amount would be deposited by the corporate debtor in an escrow account, so that the RP is able to function in independence environment. He is not supposed to ask his fee. In case this PPIRP fails, the company doesn't go to liquidation. It simply stays with the management. It continues as it is. So it is just like a restructuring proposal. I say anyone who is approaching lenders that it is a restructuring proposal or it is an OTS proposal, it may or it may not be accepted. Why should they say no? The lenders have they are not losing anything. Rather, they are getting updated information about the corporate debtor. They would get updated balance sheet. They would get updated list of assets and liabilities. So it is actually most beneficial to the lenders to say yes immediately. Whether they have to accept the base resolution plan or not, that is a later scenario. So they simply say yes. They simply say yes. Like even before they say yes, the base resolution plan has to be submitted to them. So this is not really provided in the law that in case they say yes, they have to approve the base resolution plan. They can reject the base resolution plan later on. So the initial approval is something that the lenders must give because this is actually beneficial to them. So that's very well said, Jyotiji. That's very well said.
Thank you.
Mr. Amin, like since you are an insolvency professional, you have an experience of handling insolvency cases. See, do you find that there is some differences in the duties of the RP between CIRP and PPIRP? But see, I'm indicating to you that there is a pre-appointment duties of RP in the PPIRP structure. So can you just point out what are those roles which is pre-appointment? When you are not even appointed by the NCLT, there are some roles that you have to play. So what are those roles? What is the duties of the RP in this PPIRP structure, Mr. Amin?
First of all, thank you, Anilji. And I also thank Ashokam on behalf of BDO for providing this opportunity. It's an honor to be part of this learned panel and participants. So I'll just quickly take the audience through the nitty-gritties and how the roles of RP are defined and how it is connected with the overall framework. So just to brief you, that PPIRP model expects from all the stakeholders, facilitators, decision makers, and adjudicating authority to save time. As the time is essence in any stress situation, and survival is a function of right decision at right time. There is a shift in responsibility of resolution professional in case of a PPIRP, mainly in terms of triggering of events and timelines.
See, you are not audible. Is just see that.
Hello.
Maybe that.
Am I audible now, sir?
No, yet is okay.
Okay, great. Sure. So there is a shift in responsibility of RP's role in PPRP, mainly in terms of triggering of events and timelines as compared to CIRP under IBC. However, the central theme remains the same, where the RP is tasked with safeguarding the interest of stakeholders and the business of CD, ensuring the transparency and fairness of the process, and ensuring the compliance with the law. So, role prior to initiation of CIRP remains more of a strategic partner, ensuring events which are scheduled to trigger after initiation of PIRP should not get distracted or affected by anything which exists prior to PPIRP. It is pertinent to note that though the law is not very specific on role of RP during pre-admission stage, except there is a formality in terms of Form 8 to be filed along with application to be filed with to be filed with NCLT. However, the roles and responsibility, however, there are many embedded requirements under law which require preparedness for post-admission stage and RP's role in post. So just to correlate between the role which is required rather post-admission of PPRP with the roles or responsibility of RP in pre-EPRP stage, I will just take few instances or the roles and responsibility of RP so that it can be viewed jointly. So first, in relation to appointment of professional during PPRP, including valuers. Now, as the PPRP process as such is a very time constrained process where everything has to be worked out and completed within the limited time frame. Planning and pre-identification of the professional, including valuers, before formal filing at the meeting of unrelated FCs can really help in expediting the process. So though this is not defined, but as a RP, when you are on board, and as a COC who is ultimately the decision makers, can definitely work upon these areas where it can be, which can help in expediting the process. So I'll be taking up all those areas where something or any steps in relation to or during PPRP can help us in achieving the goals within timelines at post PPRP. Similarly, 29A and other compliance check of DRP. So though there is a provision under law for undertaking by corporate debtor, some sort of checks or some comfort which can be built in before filing in relation to 29A checks, because personally as a RP we have seen processes where it may take a longer time to get these checks done within the limited time frame. If that can be planned in a way so that it can be started, that can help. Again, preparation of information memorandum, which is historically remained a challenge for RPs. In PPRP, where COC decides to invite competitive resolution plan, preparedness of data room can save a lot of time if that's the process which starts. So though there are enough provisions and comfort which has been built in for RPs for post PPRP, but the initiation of this exercise at pre-CRP, pre-PPRP level can really help. Again, claim confirmation and determination by the RP in post PPRP process, BCC available facts and best estimate, a formal confirmation of claim and record of claim with the information utility and related exercises, not only limited to the FCs, but also in related to, because corporate debtor is initiating the entire process, it is useful that for the all critical OCs as well, if those records and those details are filed with information utility, the RP's role, which is a very critical and a time constraint, can be eased out with the help of using the platform which has been provided by information utility. So both for the data room as well as for these two parts, it can be helpful. Again, in case of avoidance transaction, so under PPIRP, the application for relief in relation to avoidance transaction, which requires RP to form an opinion within 30 days, and application has to be filed within 60 days. So time and again in multiple occasions, in multiple webinars, we are hearing that there is a limited time frame within which the RP has to perform. But again, as a best practice, as the RP and unrelated FCs and any which way the corporate debtor is in the central theme of the entire process, where they are the one who are the ultimate beneficiary of this mechanism. So there also, if this exercise, though again, as I mentioned, that there is an enough provisions which has been covered under the law by way of an undertaking from the corporate debtor in relation to this avoidance of transactions. But the verification still is a lengthy process and is an independent process of what promoters or other corporate debtors are submitting. So there also, if best practices, because now still the law is in very initial stage of setting up the best practices law. I mean, best practices has to be evolved, but a preparedness at this level can definitely help us in saving time. And last, also in relation to the transaction requiring COC's approval during PPRP. So here we have to understand that the debtor in possession regime has, under that, the existing management has to run the businesses. Now, as per Section 28 of IBC, the COC still remains under PPRP also a decision maker in certain critical transactions. So at the first or second meeting of unrelated FCs, if these transactions, including related party transactions, because in some of the cases, corporate debtor, we have found that there are related party transactions which are again required for the business to continue. And also in relation to interim funding or any other related transactions which are required to be carried out during PPRP, if the framework or the preparedness, or rather with the help of approval of unrelated FCs, if that can also be taken up at the pre-filing stage, we can save a lot of time and unrelated attention which this issue may take during PPRP can be avoided, so that the critical focus can still remain on the bid process and ultimately resolving the corporate debtor. Last but not least, it is a responsibility of RP during PPRP to report to committee of creditors and the stakeholders in relation to the operation. So he has to monitor the operations of the corporate debtor. Along with that, he has to also report in case of any non-compliances or in case of any deviation by the corporate debtor during this period. So there also, if there is a consensus between the stakeholders, mainly unrelated FCs and RP at the CRP stage, with what is the structure, form, and manner in which this report or rather reporting can be updated, and if that's been sorted out at the pre-PRP level, that can really help when RP has to deliver multiple tasks or achieve multiple milestones in the process in the timely manner. So it's basically a more of a strategic planner role which RP and COC jointly has to play during PPRP, so that the timelines are not we are not deviating from the timeline. So that is the main thing. Apart from that, as I mentioned, that under PPRP, the monitoring RP has to monitor affairs of the corporate debtor and act as eyes and ears of the stakeholders, including the timely update of any breach by debtor in charge, and also facilitate the bid process. That is more or less similar in line with the CRP. So these are the broad thing which I thought. So one thing which I missed out on, finalization of evaluation metrics. So again, in this PPRP model, there is a very detailed coverage on how the bid process, particularly in terms of competitive, where the competitive plans are invited and received, how the process should be run. So there also, rather than convening and finalizing this criteria, including tick size, time limit for iteration, maximum number of iteration, and other related evaluation criteria and eligibility criteria, if that can also be deliberated at the pre-filing stage and finalize among the stakeholders, that can also really save the time, because the first meeting of the COC has to be held within the 14 days. And that 14 days timeline, if RP has to complete multiple tasks, decision on these critical aspects can save a time, because that invitation of the parallel or competitive resolution plan, for that also timelines are very crunch. So practically, if these decisions are taken, we will not be losing time on the various critical aspects where the focus should be to save time and conclude the process. So yeah, that will be all from my side. Thank you, Anilji.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Burgesh. So I would only add a couple of things. The duties of the resolution professional in this case during pre-initiation period is very, very significant. So the process is like when the financial creditors will form an opinion that they would allow the initiation of PPIRP, they will conduct their own process for appointment of an independent RP. They would select an insolvency professional who is independent, and they will appoint him by giving an engagement letter, and from that date, the duties of the RP starts. And please also watch, because there is a declaration by majority of directors, and whatever is the date of that declaration of majority of directors, within 90 days, the application has to be submitted to NCLT. So when the RP is appointed, thereafter the RP has to prepare a report on the eligibility of the corporate debtor. Then they actually will have to say something about the process conducted, also the documents submitted by the CD, the resolution, whether the resolution plan, base resolution plan conforms to section 54K or not. So this report has to be filed before the NCLT, and also the RP would be given immediately the list of creditors. And in case the RP finds that there is a class of creditors in the list of creditors submitted to him by the corporate debtor, then he will also appoint authorized representative for each class of creditor. So he will also follow a process for appointment of authorized representative. So these duties of the RP, in fact, the duties of seizes once that period of 90 days is finished. So these duties, in fact, one other thing that the Burgesh also said, that there are some other things which are supposed to be done by the RP even before the appointment of appointment by NCLT, because after the appointment, the timeline given is very, very challenging. So most of the work would be done by the RP during the pre-initiation period, and there is a separate fee which would be payable for pre-initiation period and a separate fee for the post-appointment period. So these are some of the important things. And one part that regarding the avoidance transaction, even while filing the application, the corporate debtor has to give a declaration whether they have been involved in any kind of avoidance transaction. And there is a form also which is prescribed, form P7, that also has to go along with the application. In fact, some of the banks are coming up with the policy that they would first get the forensic audit done, then only they would give in principle approval for initiating PPIRP. So Mr. Ankur Srivastav, like in case you would probably understand, what are the other requirements for filing the application before NCLT? What are the entire process? This process is defined as 90 days process from the date of declaration by majority of directors. What do you think the preparation that is required to be done by the corporate debtor so that the application is filed and correctly filed? Mr. Ankur Srivastav, please.
Thank you, Anilji. Thank you, SOCM and the learned panelist and all the audience. Let me start that pre-packed insolvency. This has been initiated by way of an ordinance. And if you see, I will just start maybe a critical analysis also of doing this, that not much banks or even the corporate debtors have interested in opting this pre-pack till now. There is now the bill has been passed by the Lok Sabha and it will become act, but the ordinance was already there. And a lot of things have been there. To understand this, there are already the mechanism of the OTS and which the banks are negotiating. In the, if you see the current CRP cases also, which are prolonging, the banks are now where the resolution is not happening and the CRP period is exceeding, the banks are opting for a sort of a proposal under 12A with the promoter itself. Now coming back to the MSME, this is particularly applicable to the MSME. As per the Nitish Jain ji presentation, the first impediment is a lot of MSME which are not registered under MSME Act, which is the prerequisite. So once a company or a corporate debtor, which is an SME, is planned to opt for the pre-pack insolvency, the process starts from there, whether they are registered or not. Then they have to seek that whether they are eligible under section 29A of the IBC or not. If certain conditions are not, then obviously the 3-year criteria that there should not be any insolvency or another actions pending against them. if we see a general scenario, right now, a lot of SMEs are already against which the banks have initiated the CRP. So how to deal with those cases? The next thing will come after all these things. They have to pass a shareholder resolution, which is not a much difficult task because these are mainly family owned SMEs, not a very broad based or a listed SMEs except a few. So that will not be. So when these things will happen, they have to approach to the bank. As you rightly said, the first thing is that bank will ask whether some forensic audit has been done, whether their report is being come before accepting the application. So these are all the things which are the prerequisite before proceeding with the application. Sometimes the RP which has been proposed by the corporate debtor, the banks have to approve it. Bank may will try to appoint some other RP. And of all of our professionals and everybody who are dealing with the CRP, the application process and getting something changed in the NCLT itself will take a lot of time. So pending these things, when we have filed the application, these are the prerequisites. We have to finalize the entire strategy. The corporate debtors, the financial creditors, they are on to be the same page, which is a little bit difficult because normally when the banks or financial creditors deal with such type of proposal, they will say that I will consider your OTS only when you give me some upfront payment on this, which may not be required in the case of the pre-packed. So how the financial creditor will see, they may consider that instead of going for the pre-pack, which is otherwise a very good option, they can say that, okay, I can deal with you in the under the OTS. Why to go through this process entirely? Give me my 10% or 20% of your OTS amount. And within our scheme of things, which are governed by our bank policy and the RBI circular, we can go with the OTS. The whole concept is that it is much more beneficial to the corporate debtor to go in a proper restructuring form, which may not be otherwise. They have earlier all the schemes were basically framed in favor of the banks. It is the initiation by the banks to whether the OTS or whether the other schemes by the RBI. Here one scheme has come for the corporate debtor that they can propose the corporate restructuring. So these are again, as far the RP is concerned, we all know that becoming an RP nowadays becoming a lot troublesome with so many. I think I will draw the attention of the Sudhakar ji. Everything is on the RP with huge penalties now been imposed. Even when the RP is in control of the company, getting certain information and data itself become a very problematic things, because he is the person who has just taken over the company and company may not be in a very good shape. And with the management itself in the driving seat, whether they will cooperate or not, they will give it's very good to say that he will be in a monitoring position, but whether he will be able to get all those requirement data and everything, like Amin ji has said, that all this process has to be predetermined. What should be the format of the information? What should be the things of the things? But getting plan these all the things itself is a huge task. When we see on the paper, it's look very good, but practicality, we all dealt that if there are maybe a 10 bankers or 5 financial creditors, what is the agreed format of data, whether he will get or not? Timelines are certainly 14 days before the COC. We know how it happens, even in the case of the personal guarantor, where every clear-cut things are there. The cases are pending for more than 8 months, 10 months. So given this scenario, the intention of the pre-pack is very good, but the implementation will be certainly challenging, but not on a negative note. Entire IBC is the work in progress. As we know, there are the success stories also, things are happening also. And this is how we have to move. The role of it's become, as you, Alok ji has said in his earlier address, that it's in a hybrid structure, where the coordination between all the three, corporate debtor, RP and the financial creditor, is of utmost important. Earlier corporate debtors were in the CRP, they are out. The promoters are out. So again, there was a lot of things are happening. But here, if all the three happen, and if the restructuring happen, then it's a good. And again, with the Swiss challenge method, we can invite the new resolution applicants in that. Again, there the timeline of 15 days, as Alok ji has pointed out, it's certainly not feasible at all. And given the pre-pack insolvency period of 120 days, compared to 180 days, which is given in the CRP, I think it's a very optimistic given the current situation. So I request that Sudhakar ji also, when these are the things, so they can consider how practical things are happening in right now in the CRP process. Because as a RP or as a something, we are bound to follow so many timelines. But it's a two-way traffic where all the other participants also have to follow the timeline, which is not happening. So with this, I think this is a very good process. It is already successful in the some jurisdiction like UK. It is not that successful in certain jurisdiction, but in India, certainly for the first 6 months, not very optimistic. But down the line, now when it's become the act, things will be becoming more clearer. And with all the professionals and IBBI support, I think this initiative will be a successful one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ankurji. I will just crystallize what you said. The application is to be filed in form number 1. It is to be, I just add that it also requires a fee of 15,000 rupees. The application will be filed in electronic form, and there are a lot of documents that we are supposed to enclose. While that the application also has to be submitted to IBBI without filing before NCLT, as we have now the directions that we actually have to file an application, copy of the application to IBBI before it is filed to the adjudicating authority. So a list of financial creditors, list of operational creditors, approval of the financial creditors for appointment of RP, written consent of the RP, declaration of majority of directors, copy of special resolution of members, approval of financial creditors for initiating the PPI-RP, a report is required to be submitted by RP, declaration of profit transactions, and all these are the and the updated balance sheets, the books of accounts, information about regarding the books of account, which is not supposed to be older than 14 days. All these are required to be filed before the NCLT along with the application. So this is and for getting the consent of the financial creditors. The most important document is the base resolution plan. The base resolution plan will have to be prepared by the corporate debtor. I always say that there are 2 people required in this PPI-RP. One, a consultant who actually would be engaged with the corporate debtor. That consultant would be a person who has an experience of insolvency and restructuring, so that the base resolution plan is perfectly prepared, which also considers section 53. And as Alokji very well said, that there should not be much of discrimination between the treatment of the creditors, and the objective of PPI-RP should not have been visible in the application or in the base resolution plan. So the most important document is the base resolution plan, which is supposed to be prepared by the corporate debtor, is supposed to be submitted to financial creditors. What is the base resolution plan? What are the contents of the base resolution plan? I will reach out to Anju Agarwal for actually kindly appraise the participants today. What is the base resolution plan? Who is supposed to prepare it? What are supposed to be the contents of base resolution plan? Anju Agarwal, please.
Thank you, Anilji. And I think it's good afternoon to everyone, to the panelists and to the delegates. Thanks for the opportunity. And Anilji, just a little, kind of correction. I'm not a chartered accountant.
Okay.
I have been a management consultant and economist, basically. So my most of the education is in economics. And I think that has been the reason why I could, fit in this role, because I think for an entrepreneur or being in the shoes of the entrepreneur, those are the skills which insolvency professionals actually require, because they have to, think from a 360-degree perspective to understand how to run the organization, and especially in a distressed situation. So anyways, as for your question, I think in short, as per the law and the regulations, what is required for the base resolution plan, I would just, kind of summarize it into that. Most of the aspects of the section 30 is mutatis mutandis applicable here also in the base resolution plan. So as far as the base resolution plan under PPI-RP goes, most of the things which is there in the CIRP process, most of the application or the preparation or the, I would say, contents of the base resolution plan would be coming from there itself, and mostly it is that. What I want to hear, kind of talk about is more of the practical aspect, ground reality when PPIRP is kind of initiated, or any promoter trying to work out a resolution plan, a base resolution plan, and what are the challenges for him, and then later on for the creditors and the resolution professional in that sense. So I would rather, talking about the things which are already available on paper with us in the PPIRP process, I would like to make here more thought-provoking ideas, which would help us in the process in the long run. So in the very beginning, Alok sir said about the statutory liabilities, or, treatment to the different class of creditors in the base resolution plan and things like that. And second aspect is the TRA, the avoidance things, if at all, a resolution resolution professional sees anything or something comes out during the avoidance transaction inspection or anything, when the resolution professional is deciding about that. So two things which are very, very important. So obviously it is a very wishful thinking, I would say, that not much difference should be, or kind of differentiation should be done for the different class of creditors. But I think it is very, very obvious where like we are talking about a stressed, or an organization which is already starting on a stress kind of a situation. So we definitely know, or kind of presume that there would be more liabilities than the assets. And whenever an organization or a company goes into stress or starts on the stress, the first thing they default on is the statutory liabilities or the statutory responsibilities. So definitely there would be defaults on, say, for example, GST, there would be default on IT aspects, so there would definitely be defaults. Now if you are talking about for a restructuring or something like that, I don't think, although as I already said, that it's a very wishful thinking, not differentiating or providing for the statutory liabilities in the resolution plan, base resolution plan. But practically, what I am seeing already, whosoever is kind of approaching us for the PPIRP process, any promoters, there are huge statutory liabilities. That's the ground reality. So we will have to see. And Section 53 application again is there. So if there are secured financial creditors who would definitely want their money back from the assets which are charged to them, they would be taking decisions as in the CIRP process, as well as what FEOC does. They do not care for the operational creditors, whatever the law says and things like that, until and unless there is something due to operational creditors or statutory creditors in the Section 53. So means if there are enough assets for that, so then only it will happen in the base resolution plan also, otherwise it is not going to happen. So we should be prepared for that. Second thing, which is very, very important, which was kind of bothering me in the sense, we are talking about here avoidance transactions. What happens in the CIRP? Avoidance transaction happens, and there are a lot of transactions come out in the report, and we file an application. Although I have not seen much happening in the courts for the avoidance transaction, but in any case, because here we are dealing from an outsider party who is bringing a resolution plan, or different resolution applicants competing for that company, still it works, because that promoter or the directors of the company are already kind of absconding sort of a situation, and they kind of declare themselves already bankrupt or something like that. So we take it for granted that okay, fine, nothing would come out from the avoidance. But here, where the director or promoters of the company are bringing the base resolution plan, avoidance transactions should be taken very seriously, because if at all in that particular company they are not able to bring in enough assets or something like that, they should be kind of compelled, I would say, I'm using maybe a little harsh word, they should be compelled to bring in something. If at all something comes out in the TRA, they should be compelled, or you should be made responsible to make it good, in the sense from their personal this thing, from their other companies, their sister concerns, anywhere. So there should be some mechanism that money should be brought back. Otherwise, there is no point that they have done first some siphoning of the funds, and then later on, they are coming with the restructuring, giving the haircuts to the creditors, not paying the statutory liabilities, and taking back the companies on a clean slate basis. So that aspect should definitely be brought in, that those, if there is In fact, I would suggest, obviously, it's a kind of out of a box kind of a thinking, but I would suggest if there are some avoidance transaction have been found, uh, either it should be a deemed, I would say, disqualification under 29A or something like that until they make it good, sort of a thing. So something like that arrangement should be there. And then in that context, I would again say maybe a group insolvency or M&A kind of thing, or diluting the equity of the promoters would be a good idea, because it is very, very possible that the promoters who are having actually 2-3 entities, and where they are doing business, one entity is not good but the other 2-3 entities are good enough. Say for example, I'll give you a promoter example of a promoter who's doing an OEM for an automobile company, where he's kind of manufacturing 3 to 4 components or parts for one particular automobile company. And in those 3-4 companies, or in those 3-4 OEMs, he is actually good in 2-3 companies, and one is kind of getting stressed, where he's looking for the restructuring. So definitely he should be kind of put forward or asked to bring in something from his own, and it should not be plainly or clearly taking a clean slate company, kind of doing away with all the statutory or operational liabilities and just paying to the secured lenders and taking away the company again. So those kind of things, when the practical PPIRP comes in, should be handled very well. And I think in here, resolution professionals can really play a big role, because he's the one, before bringing in the creditor, he will be the one who would be knowing all these things of the company. So he should be very mindful, or be very diligent in her tasks to take out these things on table for the creditors already. So once the proposal comes in on the table for the creditors, they actually know the in and out about the company. So that's what I think we can actually play as resolution professional a major role here. Then I think, so I think I have already covered most of the aspects which I was talking about. Other than that, a base resolution plan would be more or less, talking about the repayment, how it would be giving, what it would be giving to everybody, the term, who will be in charge of the during the implementation period of the corporate debtor. So all those. So as I said, as the resolution plan and the CIRP, most of the things would be applicable here as well. So with that, I think, Anilji, I would ask, from the panelists itself, like if something we can get actually as a discussion here, we can bring in something and we can propose something, or, suggest something, it'll be really great, like how these practically would work actually. Because that's the main idea at all, like bringing in the resolution plan. And then obviously then later on comes that significantly different plan, or a better plan. That concept will come once the base resolution plan is prepared with all these things taking under consideration. And then definitely if somebody else can bring in, because I'm also again thinking for the statutory liabilities which we talked about in the very beginning, I don't think any other new person who's coming as an investor would also be paying for those liabilities, if at all there are huge liabilities. And if the corporate debtor himself is, proposing a lot of haircut to the statutory liabilities or the operational creditor. So I don't think that any new person or any new investor is in any case going to come in for better resolution for those liabilities. So with that, I think, I will take.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anju. So Anju, like this is one that you see, like there was an apprehension when this base resolution plan concept was being introduced. There was an apprehension that the resolution plan is being offered by the promoters or the corporate debtor. And they also know that in case we are asking for impairment of the claims of the operational creditors, then they will also have to somehow dilute their shareholding in the company.
Shareholding equities,
So they probably, there was an apprehension that they would offer a value of 1. In case they feel that the company is having value of 10, they will start at 1. And because they know that they have asked for the impairment of claims of operational creditors, so the resolution plans will be called from the operational creditors, generally from the public at large. So whatever the public will offer, we have a right the promoters have a right to improve their base resolution plan and to compete with the resolution plans which actually come from the public at large. So
Correct.
there was an apprehension that they would start only at 1 till the time the resolution plans are received from the public at large, and in case there is no resolution plan received from the public, they will take their company having value of 10 at rupee 1. So that was the
Yes.
apprehension.
Yes.
Then therefore the significantly better resolution concept was introduced in this legislation, that the COC will decide about what would be the parameters of significantly better resolution plan. So there will be an evaluation matrix, there will be a score system, and the COC will decide in case we receive any resolution plan which is having, for example, as an illustration, like if the base resolution plan is having 100 score based on various parameters as decided by the committee of creditors, and if a significantly better resolution plan scores 150, then the promoters will lose their right to improve base resolution plan. So
Yeah, so I
that
think
is
that COC will decide in
that
hand.
COC
That
will
is the-
decide.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is what is a significantly better resolution plan. So in case there is no significantly better resolution plan, then all the resolution plans which are received from the public at large, there will be a best resolution plan based on the evaluation matrix after negotiation, and the best resolution plan will compete with the base resolution plan over a so-called Swiss challenge method. Although it is not mentioned, the word Swiss challenge is not mentioned, but there will be a kind of a technology system which actually will provide you parameters, parameter 1, 2, 3, 4, and accordingly there will be a competition, electronic competition, or maybe on an Excel sheet competition if the platform would not be available, and that would be finally deciding which particular resolution plan is scoring the maximum. So that resolution plan will be submitted to NCLT for approval. May it be a resolution plan from public, or may it be a resolution plan from the promoters. So this is the total solution. So there are resolution plans from the public. There is a competition. The COC will have all the powers to negotiate with the resolution plan submitted by public at large. The COC will get the modification of the base resolution plan. So in this manner, the value would be received. So that is what is a complete PPIRP process. Now, like although almost at the end of the panel discussion, I need to ask as a concluding remarks from Pooja Mahajan, like what exactly is the key differences between the corporate insolvency resolution process and pre-packaged insolvency resolution process? Pooja ji, are you there? I could see your.
Yes.
I couldn't. Yes, Pooja ji.
I'm there. Thank you, Anil ji. A very good afternoon to everyone. I think most of the points are already covered while the panelists, were mentioning the key features of the PRP process. But I will just summarize, maybe perhaps in broad buckets rather than going into detailing in what the key differences between the PIRP and CIRP are. Of course, one is relating to the initiation. The initiation process is completely different. Who can initiate is also different. We have it limited to MSMEs in case of PRPs, whereas in CIRP it's much broader. The threshold for initiation is also different. So the process, the threshold, and the eligibility for initiation all are different when we talk about pre-pack as opposed to CIRP. Now, once the process actually starts, of course, one of the biggest difference between a PIRP and a CIRP is the concept of a debtor in possession that we are retaining as far as pre-packaged insolvency process is concerned. Now, the very concept of a CIRP process when the code was evolving was to somehow suspend the management and get the RP in control so that RP starts running the company as a going concern, because the basic assumption was that the promoters so far perhaps have not been managing the company that well. And therefore, let's get an independent resolution professional in place who can then take a independent view of the matters. Now, we do have a debtor in possession regime, which is something which I would say is a drastic change to the entire concept of the IBC when it was initially enacted. Now, there are, of course, checks and balances, and that's really a good thing that there are some checks and balances which have been kept in mind. The checks and balances, be it in form of approval of the COC for actions which are listed out in Section 28. Interestingly, the IBBI regulations go beyond that, and they have additional checks and balances which are there in the code. There are additional checks and balances where COC can actually put thresholds and can have additional items which need to be approved by the creditors in addition to what is provided in the code. And of course, there are reporting requirements also, which the IBBI regulations very rightly so have provided for in terms of reporting from time to time. The third big difference, I would say, is of course in terms of the timelines of the process. We have a very, very crunched, I would say, timeline, very optimistic timeline. And I think the biggest challenge that we will face is actually completing it within the timelines that we have envisaged. Because let's remember, one of the reasons why we have introduced a pre-packaged insolvency is because we felt that CIRPs were taking a very, very long time. So if the very rationale, one of the rationales for introducing a pre-patched resolution process is to somehow crunch the timelines, we need to be very mindful of how that timelines can be crunched. And I think Rugesh earlier mentioned the preparation which can be done pre-insolvency commencement to make sure that those timelines are met. Anju mentioned about avoidance. That I also see is going to be a bit of a challenge when we talk about the crunch timelines, because we are really expecting the resolution professional to come to an opinion within a period of 30 days. And, just going with experience, 30 days, given the number of things that he's supposed to be doing, I personally feel it's going to be a big challenge. Unless, as someone else also suggested in the panel, perhaps we could have a pre-insolvency commencement, some sort of a forensic audit or transaction audit, which is done beforehand. I feel that's the only way it could work. Otherwise, the timelines, I feel, may actually, it may not be possible to achieve it. And we have to also see this is linked to Section 29A issue also. We are expecting promoter to be putting up a base resolution plan. The expectation is on the assumption that he's in compliance with Section 29A, including the provision which says that the company should not be subject to any preferential, undervalued, and fraudulent transactions. So what happens in case the adjudicating authority, let's say on the 90th day, passes an order that, that there is a preferential transaction in the company? Am I going to unwind everything at that time? So we'll have to sync up those timelines a little. Then the next would be, of course, in terms of moratorium and the insolvency process resolution cost. Because the assumption is that the corporate debtor will continue to run the company. The costs which are associated with it are not included within the overall costs. And lastly, I would say the process itself, the process of inviting the resolution plans, the process of the entire bidding process between the promoter and the third party, that itself is very unique and very different, and very, very different from what CIRP has. One observation I noticed that the IBBI regulations don't really talk about an EOI process. It talks straight away about invitation for resolution plan, which I would assume is more an RFRP process. And the expectation is that by that time, the entire process, the basis of evaluation, everything is going to be crystallized by that time. Again, my personal view, given the timelines we're talking about, it takes time for committee of creditors to come up with all of this. It will take them time to put their mind together and see, what should be the tick size, for instance. It will take them time to understand that what should be a significantly better resolution plan. I wonder if we are really rushing through it, and perhaps there is a case for a little bit more extension and flexibility in the process. And again, one other thing that I was wondering when I was going through the regulations was that if you don't have an IEOI process or an EOI process preceding the RFRP process, how exactly do you ensure, the signing of the NDA, the pre-due diligence of the resolution applicants? How are we accounting for, the consultant who needs to be appointed to do 29A analysis on the various resolution applicants? So again, it's a crunch process, so that's why I believe the entire EOI process has been done away with. But I feel practically it will lead to some challenges. So Anilji, those broadly were my thoughts, in terms of difference between the two processes.
Thank you, Poojaji. As always, you need no preparation for any question. So this question that I asked you was just out of blue, and you actually have replied it very, very properly. I think the time is also a sense, because we've already overshoot the time, and at least 15-20 minutes we all have to be here, and we have our chief guest, Shri Sudhakar Shukla, full-time member of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. Everyone has spoken their views about PPIRP. Now we actually have to hear the special address from our chief guest. Shri Sudhakar Shukla ji. Please, sir.
Thank you, Anil Sahib, and all the preliminary panelists who have enlightened me during the course of presentations. And I see a wide endorsement to the initiative taken by the government to bring the PPIRP to resolve the stress, especially in the context of MSME problems, which we were staring. So, barring a few, I thought Ankur Srivastava ji was more challenging the, I think, a might of IBPI on the sense that basically compliances and related penalties other than PPIRP was the issue. So he wanted to flag it in front of me. So very well noted what he said. But I think in respect of PPIRP, timelines are aggressive, and actually all have pointed out that it will serve some credible service to the evolving processes of the code. I think it was a difficult task for me right now because most of the things which I intended to say have been said. But I would, it also gives me opportunity to pick some of the thoughts and try to say some of inputs from our side, basically, in this conference. So we all started with a very solid opening by Mr. Alok Dheer Saab. So actually that was the setting which I thought a chairperson is supposed to do. But anyway, you have reversed the process. So actually those thoughts which he wanted to say, I was also prepared to share with the participants. But anyway, I thought what he said was appropriate. And I agree most of the things he said about the hits and misses. Basically, we succeeded in evolving a credit culture in the country. We have done fantastically well in terms of ease of doing business. We have done well in terms of recovery rate. Misses have been also elaborated in his, and we acknowledge that time taken is not as per what we laid down in the statute. Actually, we wanted to make it mandatory, but Supreme Court, maybe rightly so, they have stuck down that clause that it cannot be mandatory, is just directory. But even if we say that the timelines have been very, like we have exceeded the timelines from 330 to average of 458, that has actually, if you compare with our other processes, I think you will still stand by IBC that we have delivered most timely intervention in comparison to others. So that is there. We are also blamed about many things. Sorry for this. So basically, what and the one he pointed out actually was on the liquidation. Basically, is a what we conceived was a liquidation remote processes, and our objectives do not refer to liquidation, but 2/3 of the companies are heading towards liquidation, and only 1/4 are yielding resolution. So, but I just wanted to say that in this regard, if you say 2/3 of the companies which are going into liquidation, in terms of value weightage average, if you say, in terms of value, they are just meagerly dealing with 25% of the realizable value which has otherwise come through other process resolution, basically. So 75% is coming contribution as a realizable value from resolution and 25% from the liquidation. And reasons are very obvious actually. If you see that the company who is coming for under the stress, basically if it is having a past history and was being resolved through various mechanisms earlier than IBC, SICA and others remedies which were there, then in the process actually over a period of time their value has become near to zero. So to expect a company which has come with a near zero asset base to say that IBC failed in realization is not a good enough criticism, because IBC processes can yield maximum result only when there is a strong asset base. If there is no asset base, you can we have so many examples of services sector which come for resolution with 8,000 crore default and claims, and still realization is in terms of hundreds of crores. So people in the newspaper see a partial story that this realization, and recently 2-3 cases have been happened. I don't want to name them because they are further under litigation. So even AA went on to say that there have been a massive haircut in a particular case. But my personal thinking is basically haircuts relate to a situation when a company enters the process with some hairs. If company itself is not having any hair, so relating it to haircuts is a immature a bit to allege that IBC processes have induced the haircut. So that's what we are seeing in the newspapers about the haircut. We are responding also as a regulator that these are not coming through IBC processes. They are actually more of market wisdom, COC's wisdom, and the market opportunities, whatever coming, are deciding the haircut. So it is not anywhere IBC process does not lay down anything about haircut, what should be the normal haircut size should be. So this is basically, we have seen that, and even if you see the haircut part, basically, when we talk about haircut in the newspaper setting, we are talking only in terms of realizable value, what has been decided by AA. But there are certain things which are pending still, and those are basically related to your companies like guarantors. Basically, the Supreme Court judgment is already there. The realization from guarantors is still pending, and like avoidance transaction, actually to over 2-3 lakh crores of case like value is standard with the avoidance transaction, which details we have in the bureau. So definitely there are some more things have to come above what has already been realized through the process. So this we have to keep in mind when we evaluate the hits and misses in that sense. So definitely, as Nitish Jain was saying, that basically NCLT is overburdened, and we have seen the budget speech. This is the top priority of the government, that to strengthen the NCLT, and we hope that this promise what has been made in the budget speech would be fructifying soon. So we need a massive overhaul or strengthening of the NCLT processes and also the manpower. So that's what is to be decided by the government. We as a regulator cannot comment on that, but basically as a regulator, we are saying that some processes can be administratively driven, and if they are taken by IBPI, there would be we would be happy to share that space with the other mechanism available. Basically, we are saying that like at admission stage, maybe that time of say 10 to 1 year, 10 months to 1 year is too much, and maybe and when we always say that this value of the CD is inversely related to the time taken. So basically, if time is cut at the admission stage itself, then things will be improving. So that part we are seeing in the fresh start process. Again, we are saying that administrative arrangement can work. So even if you see this, and some of you have pointed out that basically the rollout right now is confined to only corporate sector, and not non-corporates, and individuals are out of it. So basically, if you see the international recommendations and best practices, and also the recommendation of BLRC, basically it was suggested in that basically that you have to roll out the process in a phased manner, and also with the maturity of the market. So we thought introducing for MSME, we had a strong case due to COVID, but we wanted to test the water. But definitely, like larger firms, somebody said, yes, that is the next step where we can go. And also, if we go to individual insolvency, then small firms which are referred, we have just captured the segment and not the larger part of micro industries which are not corporate. Actually, those would be coming into play. I think some more points have been raised on whether this system is comparable with OTS or not. I think from our side, it is very clear that we give a alternative which is more efficient and is more transparent, and that is very important when we compare with OTS. Actually, we are talking about resolution, whereas OTS is talking about recovery, and also the transparency of the system, which comes with the AA's stamp, is also save many heads from answering ethical questions which will come up if you go straight away to OTS. And thirdly, I thought it is very important that all the stakeholders' interest is involved here. In OTS, you are only talking about financial creditor. Here we have said that operational creditors, today not much has been discussed on operational creditors in the seminar, but definitely their interest has been safeguarded. And if some understanding has come up between financial creditors and this CD on the resolution plan, and if it does not impair the value of OCs, then certainly I think that plan can be approved by the COC without further moving into Swiss challenge. So that is protection of OC is very much provided. Then some questions have been on I have answered rollout. Then we have a question on basically avoidance transaction and other things. Basically, rigor of the code. I think we have fully were wary of the fact that we have come to a situation where the CRP process is fully established. And so here, if we say that basically compromising any of the tenets of the CRP, then we are actually diluting the whole IBC regime. So we were very, in fact, when we planned it, this process, we thought we would be really taking into account all the basic objectives of the code. And the first basic objective is resolution as a top priority. And everybody has pointed out this fact that there is a dearth of resolution applicants. So now CT itself gets the chance to run the company as a going concern during the process. And if through market mechanism some things comes up, then definitely that solution would be coming in. It is a liquidation remote because provisions are there that only in case of fraudulent activity detected, this direct liquidation call cannot be taken. So it is very clear that it is a liquidation remote, and that was my intention of the objectives of the code to begin with. So that is very much part. Maximization of value, all have already discussed in detail about the base resolution plan on your tick size and also the evaluation matrix, how it will move forward. So they are all actually a part. And as somebody was saying that even like equity participation and like if recompense facility basically if you are not insisting on stakes in shares, if there is a haircut, then actually you have to justify why you have not done it. So that is a very strong clause that justification is to be provided that you have taken a haircut without staking claim on the equity. So that part is very clear on this. And I already said on the balancing of the interest of this is stakeholders. Basically, all the stakeholders have equal stakes, and their interests have been kept into mind while designing this pre-pack. Last point, I think rightly somebody pointed out that implementation delays are staring us. Yes, I can say that so far only one application has been filed under pre-pack, and we are waiting for many more. But given the fact that 90 days process is to complete it prior to going to formal system, that time has just expired. So some companies must have started in-house, for which we don't have data to roll out the process in agreement with the unrelated financial creditors. So that we don't know. But we are, from our side, having a lot of advocacy programs, and I see this as also one of the advocacy programs. Over 100 have happened now, and we have extensive discussions with the banks, and the banks have also welcomed this initiative. And what impression we are getting from the banks is basically they are each bank, and that is I think can be coordinated at the level of IBA, but each bank is coming out with its own SOP on dealing with pre-pack. So this may delay some time, but definitely something good is on the horizon. And I'm very hopeful that it will fructify in a manner as we rolled out the CRP with your all active support in the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Shukla. It was really definitely the PPIRP has got wide endorsement from professionals, from lenders, and also from MSME corporate debtors. There is no doubt about it. And this law has been it has been carefully made with all checkpoints and with all. The only difficulty so far is, as you rightly said, that the banks are presently not ready. Even if we tell them that we are holding a meeting after submission of base resolution plan to them, they come in a meeting and they are saying that we are waiting for our policy. So they are not taking a decision. So I think the the regulator can, as you said, that you are also interacting with them. So if every bank will come with their own policies and SOPs, that will delay the implementation of PPIRP. So IBA can come out, and we can also indulge with IBA in framing this and in developing the understanding. So that actually can help for faster implementation of PPIRP. With this, I thank you very much, and I will hand over this to Dr. Rajesh Singh, the Deputy Director of ASSOCHAM, for a formal thanks to you and to the other participants. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Over to
Thank you, Anil sir.
Dr.
Thank you so
Rajesh.
much. Thank you, Anil sir. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, all, and thank you, Sri Sudhakar Shukla sir, full-time member of IBBI, and all the eminent panelists and the guests. On behalf of ASSOCHAM, it is my privilege and honor to express my sincerely thanks to Sudhakar Shukla sir. Thank you so much, sir, your valuable time and this address today. Along with I also sincerely thanks to our eminent panelist member for your sparing the time and sparing the valuable input to the stakeholder. And also, I'd like to thank our delegates who have joined with the right time, this timely and meaningful discussion. At the last, I'd like to inform you that the third edition of this series we are going to on the 18th August. So we look forward to welcome you on the third edition. Thank you so much.
So thank you all, and thank you, Rajeshji, for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you, Mr. Shukla, again. Thank you, all the participants. Thanks, Mr. Dheer. Thanks, Mr. Nilesh. So it was a pleasure moderating this session, and I hope we will continue this series in the same manner. And we need some suggestions from the participants, and we would try to improve if there is any kind of observation about this series of events. Thank you all. Thanks all. We conclude this session.
Thank you, Sudhakar Sarji, Alok ji, Anil ji, and all the participants. Thank you, everyone.